You make me sick.
Leave me alone, please.
Hiding in the shadows. Hiding from who you truly are.
Oh.
You can't escape yourself.
Ah yes, the legendary game that was never supposed to be. Some never believed that we were ever going to get to this moment. And I must sadly admit that I was one of those people. The first trailer we got for Silksong premiered on February 14th, 2019. And I was literally 15 at the time. And I first played Hollow Knight 2 years earlier. I clearly remember those years when I had to provide a 3-page document to my parents for them to check if there are any inappropriate scenes in the game, for them to buy me it on my birthday or any other occasion. Great times. Safe to say it was one of the first games I've ever played in my life, except Minecraft, Counter-Strike and Dark Souls 3. And yes, Dark Souls 3 was my first RPG, so it's not my fault that I'm slightly ill in the head, so you can probably understand what this game means to me. Back then I was closely monitoring and scraping off every information I could gather about Silksong, and excitedly waiting for the premiere announcement. But then the days went by, then weeks, then months, and then years, and still nothing. And we, as a community, began slowly losing our minds. We collectively went through 5 stages of grief. After some time, we had finally come to terms with reality. It was time to take off our clown costumes and join the society as an average citizens and average clowns, and continue to make the world a better place. But, as some wise commenter once said, doubters have to win every time, but believers only have to win once. Thank you for these kind words, Wall Tomatoes. 5 months ago, at the inconspicuous Nintendo Direct presentation, they dropped a nuke. Randomly among tens of different games, here you are. Have 5 random seconds of one of the most anticipated games of all time. Now you can lose your shit. Cheers.
Silksong! We got a Silksong! It's coming to us with Silksong!
Those 5 seconds have managed to absolutely initiate a global mental outburst of an unknown beforehand scale. And it wasn't even the best part. August 21st, official trailer dropped out of the blue. Premiere date? Next month. Have fun. If those 5 seconds were the equivalent of a nuke, this was an equivalent of an antimatter conversion annihilation neutronium warhead. And yes, I've made it up. Those bastards dared to say that there was no delay, they just had too much fun making the game. And, well, honestly, I'm not surprised, because when you look at it, you can clearly tell that they've put their whole souls into it. They've been polishing the game until it turned out into something way more than the initially planned short DLC to the base game. It is incredible, although not without issues. However, it doesn't matter, because after all these years of waiting, we can finally ask, Silksong how? Not Silksong when. Let that sink in. So, how is it? Well, let's start that even though it's called Hollow Knight Silksong, it plays significantly different than the original. Hornet is more agile and swift than the knight. And, in addition to most of the OG abilities taken straight from the first title, she gets a few more which make the game's platforming section even more painful. Aha. And yeah, I swear, every single section looks like a Walmart puff of pain. Just when I thought, well yeah, it can get possibly more fucked up, the game managed to surprise me. I also believe that here they managed to eliminate the feeling of playing as a wheelchair Sam that accompanied the player at the beginning of Hollow Knight. I didn't really feel like my first few hours in Silksong had dragged that much, which is a known issue for most Metroidvanias in my opinion. Even though at the beginning Hornet's skillset is really similar to the first protagonist, although different enough to feel like a completely different game if you scratch the distinct setting, but I might be slightly biased since I already expected the game to go from
Aw, what a cute game.
to
What, are we gonna fight the sun?
But in all seriousness, I really do believe that Team Chair really improved on the initial gaming experience, because most of the people I know bounced off Hollow Knight precisely because it took so long to gain momentum. But here, even though the game got better the further I went, the first part haven't felt like a chore to get through. However, if you think that this means you can start your backed experience with the sequel instead of the first one, then for Silk's sake, don't do that. You will pray for the infection to take you in your sleep so you won't have to suffer anymore. I am myself a player who loves challenges and grew up playing difficult games.
What?
It's really weird they decided to go for this approach, because contrary to the popular opinion, I don't believe Hollow Knight is necessarily a difficult game in general. Well, it wasn't easy either, but I don't think you could compare it to the titles known for its difficulty like Dark Souls, Celeste, Sekiro, Super Midway, etc. There are hard moments in the game, but the majority of the difficult content is optional. Hard content starts relatively late down the line. Watcher Knights could be considered the first difficult part of the game for me. And there are some things for real masochists, like beating the Colosseum of Fools, which is a great feat on its own, mainly because of those brain-damaged mosquitoes, who by the way actually have a worthy spiritual successor in Silksong. I've recently come back to Path of Pain myself to see how difficult it is after all this time. And, well, it's safe to say that it looks the same way I remembered it. And Pantheon of Hollowness is, well, Pantheon of Hollowness. The actual first rage quit point for the 13-year-old me happened during the Nightmare King Grim fight. You could very well finish the base game and have a wonderful experience without ever touching one of the aforementioned parts of the game. And actually, only 5% of players have ascended the Pantheon of Hollowness, not to mention Steel Soul mode or 100% Steel Soul mode achievements, or even insane speedruns and fun mods. Because of the Silksong premiere, Hollow Knight hype is in its all-time high and everybody plays it. I've witnessed my friends having fun in the base game and then absolutely hating it later when doing the Path of Pain for one, even though they did most of the bosses after the second or third try. And they were doing it anyway only because we bullied them too. Majority of the player base had just enjoyed the really unique and distinct art style, interesting not direct storytelling, great locations, Metroidvania progression, fluid movement, interesting bosses, parkour challenges, the absolutely incredible Christopher Larkin soundtrack, the fan service, and so on and so on. I personally don't mind the higher difficulty. For me that's cool because it means more content for me, but I know that it's not something everybody enjoys. I think Team Cherry had stated somewhere that they made the game significantly harder because they know how good the Hollow Knight community has gotten. Well, yeah, if your estimation on how difficult you should make your game is based on people like Fireborn, then by those standards, yeah, Silksong is piece easy. Say what you want, but I don't personally think that it is a good statistical example and an accurate illustration of how an average Hollow Knight player looks like. But well, this is the direction they took in the sequel. The game being harder is not the end of the world. If the difficulty is fair, that is, and for the majority of the game, it really is. With some exceptions, of course. The bosses have clear and signalized attacks and are in general really good, but more on that later. But I do believe that 90% of the difficulty comes from the locations themselves, not the bosses. Those fucking Hunter Match pillows have caused so many mental breakdowns on premiere that it's actually insane. I believe that Silksong has way more platforming than Hollow Knight, or at least it's probably more difficult, so you notice it more. But I don't necessarily believe that's a bad thing, since even though the pogo mechanic works slightly differently, Silksong platforming is way more interesting due to the addition of more movement abilities in the sequel. However, there is one thing that it's my biggest criticism of the game so far. I believe that even though they were making the game for such a long time, it feels like they did not really test it, like, at all. The game has an insane amount of details. Every single NPC and an enemy has some additional dialogue after some point of the game. And the map itself might be more than twice the size of Hollow Knight. And there is so many secrets in this game. So where's the catch? It feels like they got carried away and just came up with an idea, instantly implemented it and didn't care if it makes any sense in the grand scheme of things. They threw a bunch of ideas against the wall but didn't see what stuck, but instead taped them on the wall regardless. Hey, let's add a different fighting style to the game so everybody can play the way they want. Cool, but all crests deal the same amount of damage, even though some attacks are really slow and some really fast. Personally, I was using the Wanderer's crest like 90% of the game. And by the way, which also have a hidden critical strike mechanic that's not explained anywhere in the item description for some reason. Also, who the fuck needs them shell shards? This has to be the most pointless mechanic in the game. 90% of the game you are max stacked and don't need it anymore, and even when your storage gets upgraded and you can hold more of those, you fill it out in 20 minutes. And this limit is nothing more than just infuriating because there are quests that require almost the entirety of your shard stash. And then you need to play some time without the ability of using your tools, even though you know that you could have paid it 10 times in a row if not for this limit. Why is this even in the game? It reminds me of the need to farm blood vials in Bloodborne just to artificially increase the game length, which by the way is completely pointless since the game is huge on its own. I also might be a little clueless since I haven't explored everything in this game yet. Update, I have already finished it, but my point still stands. But this game has a lot of secrets which are just straight empty. You find the most obscure secret room hidden in an optional location in a dark place after a breakable wall, and a lot of the time either you find nothing at all. Some lore statue which tells you about how the great king Eldamas III had sold his daughter for 5 rosary beds 10 years ago, or in the worst possible case scenario, those fucking shell shards. Honestly, most of the time I would prefer for it to be literally nothing. Because whenever a room is empty, I am filled with the hope that in the future it could potentially serve some purpose. Or a partial chunk of the history could save me from the need to watch another 1 hour Mossbug video to understand what am I even playing. But getting those damn shards makes you think that the developers did not understand what player wants at all. It felt like a genuine spat in the face. Okay, I might have gotten a little carried away, but you know what I mean. Also, I understand that throwing the player is pretty funny. Any dream nail? Holy shit. But sometimes the bench positioning in the game is just too much. You'll need to travel half of the location just to fight a boss one time. And sometimes even more, because a lot of save points are hidden behind a breakable walls, and if you can't find it, well, then you're in no luck. And just because you haven't spent half an hour attacking every single wall, you'll have a really miserable time. And the same goes for maps in some cases. And who thought of the bench placement in Bilgewater? Bylewater. Bilgewater is from League. And who thought of the bench placement in Bylewater? Actually, let me rephrase that. Who thought of this location at all? I genuinely believe that it's the most miserable video game location I've witnessed in my whole life. The enemy placement is straight up rude. They all have actual aimbot, it's filled with various traps, and there are a bunch of leeches that stop you from healing. And then, watch this shit. In order to get to the boss, which in order to fight you need to defeat a wave of mobs and dodge traps, mind you, you have to traverse the upwards path from the literal start of the location for the various paths and waves of enemies. And if you get hit, you can't even heal. Unless you go to the right side of the location, slide down and then hit an almost invisible breakable wall right next to the leeches. Absolute peak. And don't you say it's a spoiler, cause trust me, you'll be grateful when you see it. But other than that, I've got nothing. Even though the platforming in the sequel is different and slightly more difficult, well, excluding a certain slaughterhouse of course, I still enjoyed it, and maybe even more than previously, since I do believe that due to Hornets taking more space on the screen than Night, the platforming feels, how to put this, just different. I can't exactly pinpoint it, but it has a certain feeling to it. It's scaled down and you are not able to see as much of the path ahead, like in Hollow Knight. And I feel like the difficulty relies more on correct path planning and multiple inputs in close succession instead of pogoing and staying in the air. Or I'm just schizo, that could be the case too. The art style is the same as in Hollow Knight, except it's even more polished. It's just as stylized as before, but it has a lot more details to it. The first location in Silksong is probably prettier than any location in the previous game. At least in the execution part. It's not that I believe Hollow Knight was ugly by all means, however it relied on interesting design and how different locations stand out in terms of color palette or how they use the environment to tell you the Hollowness story. Well, Silksong does all that, but additionally it looks stunning. The feeling of launching the game for the first time after defeating the Steam checkout page boss and walking through Moss Grotto is incredible. You can see why they were making this game for eternity, just because they had so much fun making it. The amount of subtle details you can find behind every corner is honestly impressive. For example, have you seen that the smaller ants gather the remains of their foreign comrades in Hunter's March? Or that there is a hidden room in the Citadel with a threadmill that you can run on to earn an absolute fortune? Or any more that I don't want to spoil here. Normally when a game introduces a new mechanic, you could expect it's going to be present for the rest of the game, or at least the corresponding location. But here, nope, they don't give a shit. They just introduce it as a one-time gimmick, never to be used again. And they are doing it constantly.
They can't keep getting away with it!
Because they don't really care about reusing any assets. Now we just drop an absolute banger and then never talk about it again. And you know what else is also a banger? The bosses. Because they're actually way better than in the previous game. Although I still haven't changed my mind and I still don't like the idea of not seeing a boss's HP bar. But it's not like they were bad in Hollow Knight. Soulmaster, Dunk Defender, Collector, Grim, etc. were all pretty cool. But on the other hand, there is also Umud, so it sure does lower an average boss quality level. But here, I believe that most bosses are superior. Although there is a shit ton of filler bosses in this game too, but this game is at least twice as big, so it's understandable. And you don't feel like most of the encounters are massive moss charger type. But, well, actually Silksong has this motherfucker. This is by far the most depressing boss I've fought in this game so far. Not counting Bilewater, because even though it's a location, not a boss, it might as well be considered one. Every single boss I've beaten in 30 minutes max so far, and I was fighting this bastard for I think almost 2 hours on stream, and I was an inch from rage quitting. This was the only boss I fought, which I think was really unfair. Simply because it's so random, he can change direction mid-flight, and if you get to him early without most movement abilities, fighting him is a roulette. Especially because he can spawn a bunch of mobs in the arena, which deal 2 contact damage as everything in this game. And at the same time rush you, so in some situations you're doomed if you do, doomed if you don't. This fucking guy singularly almost made me get banned on Twitch because I'm not proud of the things I've said about Team Cherry developers in the time of weakness. But other than that, I really felt that was something unfair about this game. Yeah, the fact that for some reason everything deals 2 damage is absurd, and I have no idea why they did it that way, because getting 1 additional mask pretty much isn't an upgrade at all since you die in the same amount of hits anyway. But you can get used to it, since with the proper tool combination you heal insanely fast, and if you can find at least 1 safe spot between the boss's attacks, then you're probably fine. And the game is divided into 3 acts, and the third one is an absolute banger. Although a confusing one, but well, you'll see for yourself what happens then if you decide to buy it. Or because the game is under $20 and it literally broke the Steam servers with the amount of purchases, you probably already bought it. And honestly, I'm so relieved that the game is not a disappointment, because it would literally break me mentally. And the Hollow Knight community would probably get the Arkham Knight games treatment. But luckily, that's not the case here. And I do believe it's a promising Game of the Year material, since it's the biggest indie premiere in the history of the video game industry. And because Game Awards is more of a popularity show, then it's safe to say that it has a big chance of winning. Although 2025 was absolutely nuts. Death Stranding 2, Kingdom Come 2, New Mafia, New Doom, Silent Hill, so yeah, the competition is pretty tough, and out of all those games I would myself vote for Silksong. Well, yeah, out of those, because Peak Obscur 33 also released this year. And even though I very much adore Silksong, Clair Obscur for me is the best game not of 2025, but literally the best game since the release of Literal Pong 50 years ago. And probably the best of all gaming history for the foreseeable future. And maybe I'll make a video about it someday, but well, this video is not about it, and I could talk about this masterpiece for another 10 hours. But even if Silksong wins, I won't be mad, since after all these years I won't be surprised people would treat this game as a literal holy grail after it finally released. And by the way, I do believe it's incredibly funny how indie video game developers had to release their games in 2025 with all those big premieres. And some of them literally dodged Silksong release date because they knew no one would play their game. Just for them to be released at the same time as Hades 2. Great times to be an indie developer, lol. But well, for us consumers, it's wonderful. Games like Silksong or Expedition 33 are literal gaming industry saviors. Because just when we believe that the future of the industry are battle passes, subscription-based services, games costing $80 and unfinished crabs, always, out of nowhere, the light at the end of the tunnel appears. When a team of 3 people working in their parents' basement can do what multi-million-dollar companies cannot do with hundreds of people. And here in 2025, I still can't believe that after all the memes, denial, depression, putting on clown costumes, and daily updates, we can unironically say, without a pinch of gaslighting, that I've played Silksong, and it's peak.